Jake Morrison's head hurt badly as he slowly opened his eyes. The metal floor beneath him was cold and rough. His hands were tied behind his back with some kind of wire that cut into his skin when he moved. The last thing he remembered was the loud crash when his ship hit the ground on this strange planet. The room around him was dark and smelled like rust and something else he could not name. Strange sounds came from outside the walls. Jake tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy and sore. Blood had dried on his forehead from where he hit something during the crash. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Jake heard voices speaking in a language he did not understand. The voices were deep and harsh, not like any human voices he had ever heard. Metal scraped against metal as a door opened somewhere nearby. Light suddenly filled the room as a door slid open. Jake had to close his eyes because the light was so bright. When he could see again, 3 tall creatures stood in the doorway. They were unlike anything Jake had ever seen before. The creatures had hard shells covering their bodies like giant insects. Their skin looked like bronze metal that had been hammered many times. Each creature had 4 arms that ended in sharp claws. Their heads were long and narrow, with black eyes that reflected the light like mirrors. When they moved, their shells made clicking sounds. The largest creature stepped forward. It was clearly female, based on the way she carried herself and the colorful markings on her shell. Scars covered her bronze armor like white lines drawn by an artist. She was at least 8 feet tall, and her 4 arms moved like a dancer as she walked. She looked down at Jake and made a sound that might have been laughter. It was not a pleasant sound. The other 2 creatures joined in the laughter. Jake felt small and weak compared to these powerful beings. The female creature spoke in perfect English, which surprised Jake. Her voice was deep and had a strange musical quality to it. "So this is the famous human we found in the crashed ship," she said. "I am Commander Zixthara of the Vethany warrior caste. You are now my prisoner." Jake tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He coughed and tried again. "My name is Captain Jake Morrison. I was on a peaceful mission when my ship crashed. My crew—" "Your crew is dead," Zixthara said without any emotion. In her voice, "All except for you and 2 others. You should consider yourself lucky to be alive." Jake felt his heart sink. He had been traveling with 5 other people on the exploration mission. Good people who had families back on Earth. Now most of them were gone. "Where are the other survivors?" Jake asked. "They are in other cells, waiting for their fate just like you," Zixthara replied. "You will meet them soon enough." She gestured with one of her 4 hands, and the 2 other Vithani grabbed Jake by his arms. They lifted him easily from the floor. Jake was not a small man, but these creatures made him feel like a child. They carried him through dark hallways, lined with more metal doors. Strange lights glowed in the ceiling, giving everything an orange color. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Jake could hear other voices coming from behind some of the doors. Not all of them sounded human. They entered a large room that looked like it had been carved from solid rock. Cages lined the walls, each one holding a different type of creature. Jake saw beings he could never have imagined. Some looked like walking trees with arms like branches. Others had scales and breathed through gills on their necks. In one cage, something that looked like living crystal sat perfectly still. The Vethany threw Jake into an empty cage and locked the door with a device that hummed with energy. Jake immediately went to the bars and tried to shake them, but they would not move at all. "Welcome to the prison of Zetha Prime," Zixthara said. "This is where we keep creatures from other worlds who have the bad luck to crash on our planet." Jake looked around at the other prisoners. In the cage next to him sat a woman with brown hair who was clearly human. She looked tired and scared, but otherwise unhurt. Across the room, A man who might also have been human sat with his head in his hands. "Lisa? Pete?" Jake called out. The woman looked up with hope in her eyes. "Jake, thank God you are alive. We thought you were dead for sure." The man across the room lifted his head. It was Pete Williams, the ship's engineer. He had a bandage around his head, but seemed okay otherwise. "Captain," Pete said, "what happened to the others?" Jake felt sick as he remembered what Zixthara had told him. "They did not make it, Pete. It is just the three of us now?" Lisa Chun started to cry quietly. She had been friends with everyone on the crew. Jake wished he could comfort her, but the cages kept them apart. Zixthara watched this exchange with what looked like amusement. "How touching," she said. "Humans and their emotions. You are even weaker than I thought. What do you want with us?" Jake asked. "On Zetha Prime, strength is everything," Zixthara explained. "We are a warrior people. We have been fighting and surviving for thousands of years. Only the strong deserve to live." She walked closer to Jake's cage. "But sometimes creatures from other worlds crash here like you did. We cannot simply let them go, because that would be showing weakness. Instead, we give them a chance to prove they deserve to live." "What kind of chance?" Jake asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. "Combat trials," Zixthara said with that harsh laugh again. "Each prisoner must face a challenge designed to test their strength and skill. Those who succeed earn their freedom. Those who fail ... do not." Jake looked around at the other prisoners. The crystal being had not moved at all since he arrived. A creature that looked like a giant lizard paced back and forth in its cage, clearly agitated. None of them looked like they had much hope. "What happens if we refuse to fight?" Lisa asked. "Then you die slowly instead of quickly," Zixthara replied. "The choice is yours." She walked to the center of the room and raised her voice so all the prisoners could hear her. "Tomorrow the trials begin," she announced. "Each of you will face a test of combat. The crystal being will fight our stone crushers. The saurian will face our blade masters in single combat." She turned to look directly at Jake. "And the human male will face 12 of our finest archers." Jake felt his blood turn cold. 12 archers? How was anyone supposed to survive that? Zixthara seemed to enjoy his reaction. "Oh, but that is not the best part," she continued. "Since humans are so pathetically weak, we want to make it fair. You will face our archers while blindfolded." The other prisoners fell silent. Even the pacing lizard creature stopped moving. Lisa gasped, and Pete shook his head in disbelief. "That is not a trial," Jake said. "That is execution." "Perhaps," Zixthara agreed. "But if you somehow survive, you will have earned more respect than any soft-skinned creature has ever received on this world." She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "You have 3 days to prepare, human. Use them wisely." As the door closed behind her, Jake sank to the floor of his cage. 3 days to prepare for the impossible. 12 archers with him, blindfolded. It seemed hopeless, but Jake Morrison had not survived years of military service and dangerous exploration missions by giving up when things looked bad. As he sat in the dark prison, he began to think. There had to be a way. There was always a way. He just had to find it. The first day in the prison passed slowly. Jake watched as the other prisoners tried to prepare for their trials. The crystal being remained completely still in its cage, but Jake could see small sparks of light moving inside its body. The lizard creature did push-ups and practiced fighting moves with its claws in the cage across from Jake. Pete Williams was doing exercises too. He lifted himself up on the cage bars and did sit-ups on the hard floor. Pete had always been strong from working on ship engines, and now he was trying to get ready for whatever fight waited for him. Lisa was in the cage, next to Jake. She spent most of her time crying quietly or staring at the walls. Jake wanted to help her feel better, but he did not know what to say. They were all probably going to die in a few days, but Jake himself did something that surprised everyone. He sat down in the middle of his cage, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes. Then he stayed that way for hours without moving. "What are you doing, Captain?" Pete asked during one of his breaks from exercising. Jake opened his eyes and looked at Pete. "Getting ready," he said simply. "Ready for what?" "You are just sitting there," Pete said. "Should you not be trying to get stronger or practice fighting?" Jake closed his eyes again. "This is how I practice." Pete shook his head and went back to his exercises. He thought Jake had given up and was just waiting to die. Lisa looked at Jake with sad eyes, thinking the same thing. The Bethany guards who brought them food twice a day also noticed what Jake was doing. They pointed at him and made clicking sounds with their mouths that Jake thought might be laughter. One guard said something in their language to another, and they both looked at Jake like he was crazy. But Jake was not crazy, and he had not given up. What he was doing was something very few people knew about. During his time in the military, Jake had been chosen for special training. The training was secret and dangerous, and only a few soldiers ever made it through the program. The training was designed to make human soldiers better at surviving in impossible situations. The teachers used old techniques from different countries around the world. Some came from ancient warriors who could fight in complete darkness. Others came from people who lived in dangerous places and had to use all their senses to stay alive. Jake had spent months learning to fight without using his eyes. He trained in rooms with no light at all. He learned to hear the smallest sounds and feel the slightest movement in the air. The teachers made him dodge attacks from multiple opponents while wearing blindfolds. They taught him to use his other senses to know where enemies were and what they were going to do. The training had been harder than anything Jake had ever done. Many students quit or failed the tests. But Jake had something inside him that would not let him give up. He learned to trust his ears more than his eyes. He discovered that his body could feel things he never knew were possible. Now, sitting in the alien prison, Jake was bringing back all those skills. He closed his eyes and listened to every sound in the room. He could hear Pete's heavy breathing during his exercises. He could hear Lisa shifting in her cage when she was uncomfortable. He could hear the crystal being humming so quietly that others probably could not notice it. Jake also listened to the guards when they walked through the prison. Each guard had a different way of walking. One dragged his feet slightly. Another took longer steps. Jake memorized these sounds so he would know which guard was coming even before he saw them. On the second day, something interesting happened. Commander Zixthara came to visit the prisoners. She walked through the room looking at each cage. When she got to the crystal being, she stopped and made some notes on a small device she carried. She spent a long time watching Pete do his exercises. Pete was sweating and breathing hard as he did pull-ups on the cage bars. Zixthara seemed impressed by his strength, but when she got to Jake's cage, she laughed out loud. Jake was sitting in the same position as before, eyes closed, not moving at all. "This is how the human prepares for battle?" she said to one of her guards. "By sleeping?" The guard made clicking sounds that Jake now understood was Vithini laughter. Zixthara banged on the bars of Jake's cage with one of her clawed hands. The sound was loud and sharp. Jake did not jump or open his eyes. He had heard her walking toward his cage and was ready for the noise. "Human," she said, "are you already dead?" Jake opened his eyes and looked at her calmly. "No, I am getting ready." "Ready for what? To die quietly?" Zixthara asked. "Ready to survive." Jake said that this made Zixthara laugh even harder. "Survive? You will face 12 of my best archers, while you cannot see. Even our strongest warriors would have trouble. With such a test, maybe, Jake said. But I am not your strongest warrior. I am something different. Zixthara stopped laughing. There was something in Jake's voice that made her curious. What do you mean, different? Jake closed his eyes again. You will see. This answer seemed to annoy Zixthara. She was used to prisoners, begging for mercy or showing fear. Jake's calm behavior was not what she expected. Very well, she said. But since you seem so confident, I will make your trial more interesting. Jake opened his eyes again. He did not like the sound of that. Instead of just wearing a blindfold, I will have my guards put a hood over entire head, Zixthara said, and the archers will not just shoot at you from one direction. They will surround you completely. Pete and Lisa both gasped when they heard this. The trial had just become even more impossible, but Jake just nodded. Fine, Zixthara stared at him for a long moment. She could not understand why this human was not afraid. Every other prisoner she had ever seen showed terror when they learned about their trials. But Jake seemed almost ready for the challenge. You are either very brave or very stupid, she said finally. Maybe both, Jake replied. After Zixthara left, Pete called out to Jake from his cage. Captain, what are you doing? Why did you make her angry? Now the trial is even harder. Jake looked at Pete and Lisa. He could see the fear in their eyes. They thought he had lost his mind. Listen to me carefully, Jake said in a quiet voice. What I am about to tell you might sound crazy, but I need you to trust me. Pete and Lisa moved closer to the bars of their cages so they could hear better. Before I became a ship captain, I was in the military, Jake began, but not regular military. I was part of a special program that trained soldiers to fight in ways most people cannot imagine. What kind of ways? Lisa asked. Fighting without sight, using hearing and touch and other senses to know where enemies are. The human body can do amazing things if you train it right. Pete looked doubtful. But Jake, this is not a training exercise. Those arrows will be real. If you make one mistake, you die. I know, Jake said, but I also know something that Zixthara does not understand about humans. What is that? Lisa asked. Jake closed his eyes again and smiled slightly. We are much harder to kill than we look. For the rest of the second day and all of the third day, Jake continued his strange preparation. He sat perfectly still for hours, but his mind was working hard. He was remembering every lesson from his military training. He was preparing his body and mind for what might be the most difficult challenge he had ever faced. The other prisoners continued to think he was crazy. The guards continued to laugh at him. Even Zixthara seemed to have lost interest in the human, who just sat and did nothing. But inside his mind, Jake Morrison was getting ready for war. The morning of Jake's trial came too quickly. He woke up before the guards came to get him, sitting quietly in his cage, as he had done for the past 3 days. Pete and Lisa were both awake too, watching him with worried faces. Jake, Lisa whispered, are you sure about this? Maybe you could ask for a different trial. Jake opened his eyes and looked at her. It will be okay, Lisa. Trust me. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The prison door opened and 6 Vithani guards entered. They wore more armor than the regular guards, and each carried weapons that looked like spears with electric tips that sparked blue light. Commander Zixthara walked in behind them. Today she wore different armor that was darker and had more decorations. Jake could see that this was a special day for her. She seemed excited about what was going to happen. Time to go, human, she said with that harsh laugh Jake had grown to hate. The guards opened Jake's cage and grabbed his arms. They pulled him out and started walking toward the door. As they passed Pete and Lisa, Jake turned his head to look at them one more time. "Remember what I told you," he said quietly. "Humans are harder to kill than we look." The guards led Jake through long corridors he had not seen before. These hallways were wider and had decorations on the walls. Jake could hear sounds getting louder as they walked. It sounded like many voices talking and shouting at the same time. They went through several doors before reaching a large entrance with symbols carved into the stone. The guards stopped here, and one of them spoke to Zixthara in their clicking language. "Beyond this door is the arena," Zixthara told Jake. "Thousands of my people have come to watch you die. They have heard about the weak human who thinks he can dodge arrows while blind. They find this very amusing." Jake said nothing. He was listening to the sounds coming from beyond the door. The crowd was loud, but underneath their voices he could hear other things. The sound of wind moving through a large open space. The echo that meant high walls and a big roof. These sounds told him things about the arena that would be important later. The doors opened, and Jake was hit by a wave of noise. The arena was huge, much bigger than he had imagined. Stone seats rose up on all sides, filled with thousands of Vithani warriors. They were all clicking their claws together in what Jake realized was their way of clapping. The arena floor was made of hard dirt that had been packed down smooth. But it was not completely flat. Jake could see rocks and metal barriers scattered around the space. Some looked like they had been placed there on purpose, while others seemed to be there just to make things harder. The guards walked Jake to the center of the arena. The crowd got even louder when they saw him. Many of the Vethani were pointing at him and making that clicking laugh sound. Jake understood that to them, he looked like a joke. A small, soft creature that would be dead in a few minutes. Around the edge of the arena, Jake counted 12 platforms built into the walls. Each platform was about 20 feet above the ground and had a Vithani archer standing on it. The archers wore lighter armor than the guards and carried bows that looked like they were made from some kind of black metal. Their arrows had tips that glowed with a strange blue light. Jake studied each archer carefully. He memorized where they stood and how they held their weapons. This was important information that he would need very soon. Zixthara walked to a raised platform where other important-looking Vithani sat. She raised one of her 4 arms, and the crowd became quiet. "People of Zetha Prime," she called out in a voice that carried across the entire arena. "Today we test the strength of a creature from the planet called Earth. This human claims his species deserves respect among the warriors of the galaxy." The crowd made sounds that were clearly disagreement and disbelief. "The human will face 12 of our finest archers," Zixthara continued. "But because his species is so weak, we will make the test fair. He will face them without the use of his eyes." She gestured to the guards, who brought forward a thick black hood. It was made of heavy material that would block out all light. Jake could see that it would cover his entire head down to his shoulders. "If the human can avoid being hit by even one arrow, he will earn his freedom," Zixthara said. "If he fails, his death will serve as entertainment for us all." The crowd loved this. Their clicking and cheering became so loud that Jake felt it in his chest. 2 guards held Jake's arms while a 3rd guard put the hood over his head. Suddenly, everything went completely dark. The hood was even thicker than Jake had expected. He could not see even the smallest bit of light, but Jake was not afraid. In fact, he felt calmer now than he had since arriving on this planet. The darkness was familiar to him. It was like an old friend he had not seen in years. With his eyes useless, Jake's other senses immediately became stronger. He could hear the crowd much more clearly now. He could feel the slight breeze that moved across the arena floor. Most importantly, he could hear the 12 archers as they prepared their weapons. Each archer made small sounds as they moved. 1, clicked his claws against his bow. Another shifted his weight from foot to foot. A third one breathed slightly louder than the others. Jake began building a map in his mind of where each archer stood and what they were doing. Zixthara's voice rang out again. "Archers, prepare your weapons." Jake heard the sound of 12 bowstrings being pulled back. The sound was like music to him because it told him exactly what he needed to know. Each bow made a slightly different sound. Some were tighter than others. Some were pulled back further. All of this information would help him predict where the arrows would go. "The trial begins in 10 seconds. Zixthara announced. Jake dropped into a low crouch and turned his head slightly to the left. Years of training had taught him that the first attack usually came from the dominant side, and most creatures were right-handed or right-clawed. 5 seconds. Jake's breathing slowed down and became very controlled. His heart rate actually went down instead of up. This had always surprised his military trainers, but Jake had learned to become calmer when danger was near, not more excited. "Begin!" The arena fell silent for just a moment. Then Jake heard the first arrow being released. The sound was like a whisper of death, cutting through the air. But Jake was already moving. His body tilted to the right as the arrow passed exactly where his chest had been a split second before. The crowd gasped in surprise. They had expected the human to be hit immediately, but this was just the beginning. Jake could already hear 2 more archers drawing their bows. The real test was about to start. As the second arrow flew toward him, Jake Morrison began what would later be called the most amazing display of human ability ever seen on Zetha Prime. He started to move like no creature the Vitheni had ever witnessed. And for the first time since his capture, Jake smiled. The second arrow came from Jake's left side. He heard the archer shift his weight just before releasing the string. Jake dropped to one knee and rolled forward as the arrow whistled over his head. The crowd made surprised sounds, but Jake was already listening for the next threat. 2 archers fired at the same time from opposite sides of the arena. Jake could tell by the sound that these arrows would cross paths right where he was standing. He jumped backward and felt both arrows pass in front of him, so close that the wind from them touched his face through the hood. The Vitheni crowd was getting louder now, but their sounds were different. Instead of laughter and clicking, Jake heard confusion and amazement. They had never seen anything like this before. The 4th arrow came from directly behind him. Jake had been waiting for this one. He heard the archer pull his bowstring back further than the others, which meant this arrow would be faster and more dangerous. Jake threw himself to the left and hit the ground hard, rolling until he reached one of the metal barriers scattered around the arena floor. As he crouched behind the barrier, Jake could hear all 12 archers moving on their platforms. They were talking to each other in their clicking language. He could tell they were confused and maybe a little worried. This was not going the way they had expected. Jake used a few seconds behind the barrier to create a better map in his mind of the arena. He remembered seeing stone pillars when he first entered. There had been shallow pits in the ground and several metal walls like the one he was hiding behind now. All of these things could help him stay alive. The 5th arrow hit the metal barrier right next to Jake's head. Sparks flew, and the metal rang like a bell. Jake realized that the arrows were not just sharp, but they also carried some kind of electric charge. If one of them hit him, it would not just pierce his body, but also shock him with electricity. Jake moved away from the barrier just as another arrow hit it. He could hear at least 3 archers reloading their weapons. The clicking sounds of their claws on the metal told him exactly where they were and what they were doing. The 6th arrow came from above. One of the archers had aimed high, so the arrow would fall down on Jake like a spear thrown from the sky. Jake heard the different sound this arrow made as it cut through the air. He dove forward and felt the arrow hit the ground right behind. him with enough force to bury itself deep in the hard dirt dot. Now Jake began to move in a way that amazed everyone watching. Instead of just dodging and hiding, he started to flow around the arena like water moving around rocks. His body seemed to know where each arrow would be before it was even fired. The 7th arrow was aimed at his legs. Jake jumped over it without breaking his stride. The 8th arrow targeted his chest, but Jake spun to the side and it passed harmlessly by. As he spun, Jake's foot hit a small stone on the ground. The sound told him exactly where he was. In the arena. Jake was now moving toward the stone pillars he had seen earlier. Behind him, he heard several archers firing at once. 3 arrows flew at him from different directions. Jake dropped to the ground and rolled between 2 of the arrows, then pushed himself up and dove behind a stone pillar just as the 3rd arrow struck the stone where his head had been. The crowd had gone. Completely silent now. Even Zixthara was no longer making sounds. Every Vethany in the arena was watching the impossible sight of a blind creature moving like a ghost through a rain of deadly arrows. Jake used the pillar for protection while he listened to the archers. They were getting frustrated now. He could hear it in the way they moved and breathed. Frustrated fighters made mistakes, and Jake was counting on that dot. The 9th arrow came from his right side, but the archer had pulled his shot slightly because he was angry. Jake heard the difference in the sound and knew the arrow would miss by several inches. He did not even need to move, but the 10th arrow was different. Jake heard an archer he had not been paying enough attention to. This one was calmer than the others and had been waiting for the right moment. The arrow came fast and straight, aimed perfectly at Jake's center. Jake heard it just in time. He threw himself backward and felt the arrow cut through the hood near his shoulder. The electric tip sparked as it passed, and Jake realized how close he had come to being hit. As Jake rolled away from the pillar, he heard something that made his heart race. Zixthara was speaking to someone in their language. Jake could not understand the words, but he recognized her voice giving orders. Something was changing about the trial. The 11th arrow came from an archer who had moved to a different position. Jake realized that Zixthara had told them to change their locations. This made things much harder because Jake had been using their positions to predict where the arrows would come from. But Jake's training had prepared him for this too. He stopped trying to predict which archer would fire next and instead listened for the sound of bowstrings being pulled. It did not matter where the archers were if he could hear them preparing to shoot. The 11th arrow came from a direction Jake had not expected, but he heard the release and dropped to the ground just in time. The arrow passed over him and struck another metal barrier with a loud clang. Now there was only 1 arrow left. Jake could feel the tension in the arena. Thousands of Vethany warriors were holding their breath. Even the archers had stopped moving around on their platforms. Jake stood up slowly in the center of the arena. He turned his head from side to side, listening for any sound that would tell him where the final arrow would come from. For long seconds, everything was quiet. Then Jake heard something that made him smile under the hood. Zixthara herself was drawing a bow. The sound was different from the other archers. Her bow was larger and stronger. But more than that, Jake could hear something strange about the arrow she had loaded. This arrow hummed as it sat on the bowstring. It was not like the others. Jake realized that Zixthara was using a special arrow, maybe one that could track its target or change direction in flight. Zixthara pulled her bowstring back further than any of the other archers had done. Jake could hear the bow creaking under the strain. This would be the fastest and most dangerous arrow yet. "Let us see how you handle this, human," Zixthara called out. Jake heard her release the string. The arrow came at him faster than any of the others, and Jake could hear that strange humming getting louder as it flew. This arrow was definitely different. It was hunting him. For the first time since the trial began, Jake Morrison was not sure. He could dodge what was coming at him. But he had one more trick that none of the Vethani expected. Instead of trying to dodge the arrow, Jake did something that shocked everyone in the arena. He reached out with both hands and tried to catch it. The special arrow flew through the air with a sound like angry wasps. Jake could hear it changing direction as it hunted for him. His hands reached out into the darkness, trying to find something he could not see. For a moment that felt like forever, Jake's fingers touched nothing but air. The arrow was moving fast, and the humming sound was getting louder. Jake knew he had only one chance to get this right dot. Then his right hand felt something hard and smooth. The arrow shaft hit his palm, and Jake closed his fingers around it. The electric tip sparked and sent shocks up his arm, but Jake held on tight. His muscles burned from the electricity, but he did not let go. The arrow fought in his hand like a living thing, trying to break free and continue toward his body. Jake used both hands now, gripping the shaft as tightly as he could. The electric charge made his whole body shake, but slowly the arrow began to stop moving. Finally, the humming sound died away, and the arrow became still in Jake's hands. For a few seconds, the only sound in the entire arena was Jake's heavy breathing. Then Jake did something that no one expected. He snapped the arrow in half with his bare hands. The two pieces fell to the ground at his feet with small clattering sounds. The arena exploded with noise. Thousands of Vethani warriors began clicking their claws and stomping their feet. But this time, the sounds were not mocking or amused. They were sounds of respect and amazement. Jake stood perfectly still. In the center of the arena, the black hood still covering his head. He was breathing hard, and his arms hurt from the electric shocks, but he was alive. He had done something that should have been impossible. Heavy footsteps approached across the arena floor. Jake heard Zixthara walking toward him, her 4 feet, making her own special pattern on the dirt. When she reached him, she stopped just a few feet away. "Remove the hood," she said quietly. Jake felt hands untying the thick material. When the hood came off, the bright lights of the arena made him blink several times. But when his eyes adjusted, he saw something amazing. Every single Vethani in the arena was standing up. Their 4 arms were raised above their heads in what Jake realized was a sign of respect among their people. Even the 12 archers on their platforms were making this gesture. Zixthara stood in front of Jake with all 4 of her eyes focused on his face. The scars on her bronze armor seemed to glow in the arena lights. When she spoke, her voice was different than before. The mocking tone was gone. "In all my years as a warrior, I have never seen anything like what you just did," she said. "How is this possible? You are just a human. Your body is soft and weak. You have no natural armor, no claws, no fangs. How did you dodge 12 arrows without seeing them?" Jake looked around at the thousands of Vethani watching him. He could have made up some story about magic or special powers. But Jake decided to tell the truth. "You are right," he said. "Humans are not the strongest creatures in the galaxy. We do not have armor like yours or claws like the lizard people. We cannot breathe underwater or survive in space without protection." The arena was completely quiet now. Everyone was listening to Jake's words. "But humans have something else," Jake continued. "We learn. We adapt. We take our weaknesses and find ways to turn them into strengths." Jake walked over to one of the broken arrow pieces and picked it up. "When I was young, my people taught me that the most dangerous enemy is not always the biggest or strongest one. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to give up." Zixthara tilted her head, listening carefully. "Explain this to me." Humans have been fighting for survival since we first existed, Jake said. We have fought animals much bigger than us. We have survived ice ages and diseases and wars. We learned that we could not win by being stronger, so we had to win by being smarter. Jake pointed to his eyes. You thought taking away my sight would make me helpless. But my people learned long ago how to fight without seeing. We discovered that our ears can tell us things our eyes cannot. Our skin can feel movement in the air. Our minds can remember and predict patterns. The crowd was making soft clicking sounds. Jake realized they were impressed by what he was saying. The training I received made me better at using these abilities, Jake explained. For months, I practiced fighting in complete darkness. I learned to trust my hearing more than my sight. I discovered that fear makes you slow, but calmness makes you fast. Zixthara walked closer to Jake. You mean your people deliberately trained to fight without one of their main senses? Yes, Jake said, because we know that in a real battle, things go wrong. You might be blinded by smoke or fighting in the dark. A human warrior learns to use every sense and every tool available. Jake looked directly at Zixthara. What you call weakness, we call opportunity to improve. For a long moment, Zixthara said nothing. Jake could see her thinking about his words. Finally, she spoke again. I have spent my life believing that only physical strength mattered, she said. But what you have shown me today proves that I was wrong. Your species has found a different kind of strength. Zixthara raised all 4 of her arms above her head. The crowd immediately became quiet. People of Zetha Prime, she called out. Today we have learned something important. This human has shown us that true strength comes in many forms. His people may not have our armor or our claws, but they have something just as valuable. They have the wisdom to turn their limitations into advantages. The crowd began clicking and stomping again, but now Jake understood that these were sounds of approval. Zixthara turned back to Jake. Captain Jake Morrison of Earth, I declare you free to leave this planet. But before you go, I want to make you an offer. What kind of offer? Jake asked. Stay here and train my warriors, Zixthara said. Teach them what you know about fighting. Without sight. Show them how to use their minds as weapons, just like their claws. Jake thought about this for a moment. It was an honor to be asked, but he had responsibilities back on Earth. I am grateful for the offer, but I have to return to my people. They will be wondering what happened to our ship. Zixthara nodded. I understand. But before you leave, let me make you another promise. The Vethany people will spread word throughout the galaxy about what happened here today. Other species will know that humans are not to be underestimated. She gestured toward the arena exit. Your surviving crew members are waiting for you. A rescue ship will arrive tomorrow to take you home. As Jake walked toward the exit, Zixthara called out one more time. Jake Morrison, what should I tell other species about humans when they ask? Jake stopped and turned around. He thought about Pete and Lisa waiting for him. He thought about all the humans back on Earth who would never know about this day. He thought about what made his species special. Tell them that humans are survivors, Jake said. Tell them that we do not give up, even when everything seems hopeless. And tell them that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing how to use your weaknesses. As Jake left the arena, he could hear the Vethany crowd still clicking their approval. He had not just won his freedom. He had won something much more important. He had won respect for all of humanity. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species would soon learn that humans were much more dangerous than they looked.